My name is Claire Navarro. I'm 34, a licensed social worker and family therapist in Portland, Oregon. I left my 6-year-old son Noah with my sister-in-law for one weekend while I attended a mandatory certification conference 3 states away. When I came back Sunday evening and pulled into her driveway, Noah ran to me across the lawn, pressed his face into my shoulder, and said 6 words so quietly I almost missed them. "Mama," she said, "I live here now." I did not react. I held him tighter, I breathed in the smell of his hair, and I walked him to the car. I buckled him in. I closed the door. I sat in the driver's seat with both hands on the wheel, and I let those 6 words arrange themselves in my head, the way I had been trained to arrange facts before I speak them out loud. What I found in a storage unit 2 weeks later, what I said in a room full of people who thought they already knew the ending, and what my son drew on a piece of paper the morning after. That is the story I'm going to tell you. The first person who knew the full plan was not my husband. It was not a lawyer. It was a 6-year-old boy who still sleeps with a flashlight because he is afraid of the dark. He told me the truth before anyone else had the chance to rewrite it. I have been a licensed clinical social worker for 9 years. Before that, 2 years as a crisis counselor in a county hospital. I work with families in collapse every single week. I sit across from people who have lost custody, who have been reported to Child Protective Services, who have had their parenting questioned by strangers with clipboards and neutral expressions, and I have learned one thing above everything else. The people who survive those rooms are not the loudest. They are the most documented. That skill is the reason this story ends the way it does. That skill is the only reason. My husband Marcus and I live in a 2-bedroom Craftsman in Northeast Portland. Marcus teaches high school history, coaches junior varsity soccer, and genuinely believes that most people, given enough time, choose decency. He has believed that his whole life. That belief is one of the things I love most about him. It is also the thing that almost cost us our son. Noah is 6. He is small, careful, the kind of child who watches a room before he enters it, who lines his shoes up perfectly at the door, who asks permission before he touches anything that isn't his. His favorite object in the world is a worn green blanket he calls Patch. Not because it has patches, but because when he was 2, he told us it fixed everything. He takes Patch to school on picture day. He takes Patch to the dentist. He does not leave Patch behind. I need you to hold on to that. He does not leave Patch behind. My mother passed 4 years ago from a stroke she never recovered from. She was a quiet, steady woman who spent 30 years as a bookkeeper and raised me and my younger sister alone after my father left when I was 9. She did not complain about the life she was handed. She just organized it and kept going. She came to every single school event I ever had. She sat in the back row at my graduate school commencement in a folding chair with a broken armrest, and she cried the whole time, and she never told me until years later that her back had been hurting so badly she almost didn't come. That is who she was. When she died, she left a hole in my life that I did not know how to name for a very long time. When my sister-in-law, Renata Voss, offered to step into that space, I let her. I want to be honest about that. I let her because I was grieving, and because she was warm, and because she made it easy. Renata is 41. She lives 12 minutes from us in a 2-bedroom apartment that she has decorated to feel like a home in a catalog. Everything matches. Everything is positioned. She works remotely in marketing and has a great deal of time and a great deal of opinion about how other people use theirs. She divorced her husband 3 years ago, no children. She has one dog, a golden retriever named Huck, who Noah loves. She began offering to take Noah on weekends about 8 months after my mother died, and I said yes more times than I should have, not because I was neglecting my son, but because I was a grieving woman in a demanding job who was grateful for the help and did not yet understand the cost of that gratitude. There is a sentence Renata said to me about 14 months before any of this began. We were sitting on her balcony after dinner. Noah was asleep on her couch under a throw blanket. She handed me a glass of wine, and she looked at her apartment and she said, "He belongs here, doesn't he?" I laughed. I said, "He looks pretty comfortable." She said, "No, I mean really. He belongs somewhere like this. Calm, consistent. I took a sip of wine. I said something about him being pretty happy at home, too. She smiled. She said, "Of course. I'm sure he is." I did not write that sentence down. I should have. 14 months later, I would remember not just the words, but the steadiness underneath them, the quality of something already decided. There was a second moment, smaller, that I also did not record. Renata kept Patch after a visit and said Noah had left him by accident. I drove 20 minutes back to her apartment because Noah could not sleep. She opened the door laughing. "Oh, did he forget it?" she said. "I'll be more careful." Patch was sitting on her kitchen counter facing the window. I took him home. I did not think about it again for a long time. I should have written that down too. If I count the signals I missed before the parking lot, I get to 3. The balcony sentence, the blanket on the counter, and a caption in the family group chat I will get to shortly. There was a 4th signal I caught only in hindsight. It was a photograph of me taken in the dark. I will get there. 8 months before Noah said those 6 words, I accepted a promotion to clinical director at my agency. The hours extended. I began working 4 10s instead of 5 8s. Marcus and I were not drowning. We were not even close. We had a routine, a meal plan, a 6-year-old who came home from school and told us everything that happened in order, including the part where his friend Mason sneezed on his sandwich and he ate it anyway. We were a family managing a demanding life, which is different from a family in crisis, though I understand now that not everyone observing us chose to see that distinction. Renata began making comments the way some people make small cuts, lightly and with a smile, so that you look at the smile instead of the blade. "Noah told me he wishes you didn't have to work so much. I just want to make sure he's getting what he needs." "You look exhausted, Claire. Let me take him this weekend." I told myself she was being kind. I told myself she was filling a hole my mother left. I said that exact sentence to Marcus twice. 6 months later, it would feel like something I had said in a different language. The weekend I left for the conference, Marcus was in Sacramento for a teacher's professional development retreat, both of us away at the same time, which had never happened before, and which I later understood Renata had been tracking. She offered to take Noah before I even mentioned the conflict. She called on a Tuesday and said, "I heard about your Portland conference in March. If Marcus is away that same weekend, I would love to have Noah. We'll do something special." I thanked her. I packed Noah's bag Thursday night and put Patch on top. I drove him to her apartment Friday at noon. He walked in with Patch under one arm and his backpack on both shoulders. Renata knelt down and hugged him and kissed the top of his head and said, "Hi, my best boy." Huck was there. Noah dropped his bag immediately to chase the dog. Renata walked me to the door. She held my arm lightly and said, "Have a wonderful time. Don't worry about anything." Her voice had a quality I registered only later when I replayed it. Not surprised at having him. Readiness, as though she had been prepared for this visit for a long time. Saturday evening, she sent a photo to the family group chat. Noah on her couch in his pajamas, Patch beside him, Huck at his feet, a bowl of popcorn in his lap. The caption read, "Settled in and loving it here. This one belongs with us." I read it twice. I screenshotted it once. Then I put my phone down and told myself it was an odd thing to say and nothing more. I was wrong. Sunday, I flew home. I landed at 4. I drove straight to Renata's apartment. Noah came out the front door before I reached the steps and ran across the grass to me. I caught him. I held him up. He put his mouth against my shoulder and said the 6 words. "Mama," she said, "I live here now." I did not put him down immediately. I held him for another 3 seconds. Then I set him on his feet and crouched in front of him and looked at his face. His eyes were steady but watchful, the way they get when he is delivering information he isn't sure will be received well. I said, "Tell me what happened, bud." He said, "Renata told me that when mommies and daddies work too much, the kids get to have a special house. She said her apartment is my special house now, and I should start thinking of it like that." I kept my face very still. I said, "Did she say anything else?" He said, "She said not to tell you right away because you might not understand at first." He put his thumb in his mouth. He only does that when he's trying to get a thought exactly right. He said, "She said you would get used to it." I stood up. I took his hand. I said, let's get you in the car. I got him buckled. I gave him patch. I went around to the driver's side. Renata was standing in the doorway. She waved. I waved back. I drove to the corner and stopped. I put the car in park. I opened a new note on my phone. I typed the date, the time, the location, and Noah's words verbatim. I read it back twice. I added a second timestamp. I texted it to my personal email. Then I drove us to get ice cream because Noah asked, and because sitting in a bright booth watching him eat cookie dough was the most normal thing I could give him while my hands were still cold. That night after Noah was asleep, I sat on the back steps of our house in the dark and called Marcus. He picked up after 4 rings. He was still at dinner with colleagues. I told him slowly and evenly, the 6 words, the special house, the instruction not to tell me. There was a pause. I heard him excuse himself from the table. Then he said, Renata does this. She says dramatic things. She probably didn't mean it how it sounded. I said, Marcus, she told our 6-year-old that he lives with her now and instructed him to keep it from me. He said, I'll talk to her when I get home. I said, don't, not yet. He said, Claire, she's family. I said, I know. That is exactly why I need 3 days before you say a word to her. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, okay. I said, drive carefully. I hung up. I sat on the steps for another 8 minutes. I thought about my mother. I thought about how she used to say, the person who asks you to stay quiet is usually the person who benefits most from your silence. I went inside. I checked on Noah. I straightened Patch under his arm. I sat in the chair beside his bed until my breathing slowed. Then I went to my desk, opened a document, named it Renata, and started writing. Monday morning, I called Renata. I made coffee first. I had Noah at the table with a puzzle. I wanted her to hear ordinary life in the background. She picked up on the second ring. Claire, honey, how was the flight home? I said, good, thank you. I wanted to ask about something Noah mentioned. She said, of course. I said he mentioned something about a special house and coming to live with you. There was a silence of about 1 full second. Renata said, oh, you know how kids hear things. We were just talking about how much he loves being here, and it must have gotten mixed up in his little head. I said, he also mentioned you told him not to tell me right away. A longer silence. She said, Claire, I would never. He must have been playing a game. I said, I'm sure you're right. Have a good Monday, Renata. I hung up. Renata had not asked a single clarifying question. She had not said what, when, I don't understand. She had not been confused. She had an explanation for every point I raised, and she had each one ready in under a second. A person who is genuinely surprised asks questions first. A person who has rehearsed goes straight to explanation. I noted that in the document and added the timestamp. Then I spent the afternoon going back through 14 months of family group chat photographs, and I looked for the pattern because I already suspected there was one. In the previous 14 months, 61 photographs had been posted featuring Noah. In 58 of them, Noah was at Renata's apartment, or in her car, or in her arms. In 0 of them was I in the frame. In 11 of them, my absence was the caption. Mama's working hard so we get more snuggles. The little man needed some quality time. City kid getting some calm for once. That last one had 22 likes from Marcus's extended family. Then I found a photograph posted 4 months earlier. It was a picture of me walking out of my office building, taken from across the street at 7:15 in the evening. The caption said, she gives everything to everyone else. Someone has to make sure this boy is held. She had been across the street from my office at 7:15 on a Thursday, and I had never once seen her. I texted my colleague Dana, who works the front desk at our agency and notices everything. I said, a woman, early 40s, blonde, white Subaru, came by asking about me recently. Dana texted back in under a minute. Oh my God, yes, 3 times. She said she was your sister-in-law dropping something off, but she never came in. She just sat in the lot. Once she took a photo, I think. I set my phone down on the carpet and let the floor hold me. 14 months. 61 photographs. 3 visits to my parking lot. A 6-year-old was told to stay quiet. I sat there for 4 minutes. Then I stood up, went to my desk, opened the document, and kept writing. Tuesday morning, I called my sister Yara. She is 31, a paralegal in Seattle, 2 years younger than me, and the person I trust most in the world after Marcus. She drove up and was in my kitchen by 11 with groceries and a face that told me she had already been thinking on the way up. She put the groceries away without being asked. She sat down, she said, "Tell me everything." I showed her the document, the screenshots, the group chat archive, Dana's text, and the photograph of me outside my office. She read for 11 minutes without interrupting. Then she closed my laptop and said, "This is not a family misunderstanding. This is a documented pattern of surveillance and parental undermining, and we need to treat it exactly like that." She took out a notepad. She said, "Here is what we do. First, a written statement from your agency director confirming your performance and your schedule for the past year. Second, a character statement from Noah's pediatrician confirming he is healthy, on track, and that you have been present at every visit. Third, Dana gives us a written account of the parking lot visits with dates. Fourth, we contact Marcus's brother Todd, because if Renata has said anything to him, we want to know before she shapes that story." When she finished, I said, "There is something else. I have not told you the part about the storage unit yet." Yara set her pen down. She said, "Tell me." 2 weeks before the conference, I had helped Renata move furniture into a storage unit she rented on the east side of Portland. She had given me a spare key in case she needed me to retrieve something. I still had that key. I had been thinking about something Noah said Monday afternoon when I asked him casually whether he had seen anything surprising at Renata's that weekend. He said, "She has a box with my name on it. It has my school stuff and my allergy medicine." He put patch over his face the way he does when he is trying to picture something clearly. He said, "She has a paper on her fridge that says emergency contact Renata Voss, primary." She said it was so people would know he was safe with her. Tuesday afternoon, while Noah was at school and Yara stayed at the house, I drove to the storage unit on Stark Street. I used the spare key. I opened the roll door. Against the left wall were 4 labeled plastic bins. Noah, school. Noah, medical. Noah, clothing seasonal. Noah, legal. I opened the 4th bin first. I am a clinical social worker. I document what I find. I do not disturb what I document. I propped my phone against the wall and recorded video as I lifted each item. The first was a manila envelope containing a printed Oregon family court form, a petition for third-party custody. Petitioner Renata Voss. Subject minor, Noah James Navarro. Stated grounds, parental unavailability due to occupational demands and inconsistent primary caregiving. Recommended placement, petitioner's home. Parenting time for biological parents, weekends with review at 6 months. The second item was a typed letter from someone named Patricia Gould, family law practitioner, Portland. The letter said, "Renata, the documentation you have provided is enough to begin the intake process. A professional corroborating witness would strengthen the petition. Continue building the record." The third item was a photograph of me asleep at my kitchen table taken through our back window. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m. on a Wednesday 7 months ago. Someone had been in my fenced backyard with a camera at 11:47 at night. The fourth item was a handwritten journal, spiral-bound, 40 pages of dated entries describing incidents. Dropped Noah at school without breakfast. Arriving late to pick up, the teacher had to call. Noah cried at the drop-off and asked for Renata. Some entries had a notation at the bottom that read, "Renata present, can confirm." She was both the author and the only witness. I replaced every item exactly as I had found it. I closed the bin. I locked the unit. I sat in my car for 2 minutes. Then I called Yara. She was quiet when I finished. Then she said, "We have everything we need. Don't touch the unit again." I drove home at the speed limit, and I practiced the sentences I would say to Marcus when Noah was asleep. Marcus watched the video at the kitchen table without speaking. He watched the petition. He watched the letter from Patricia Gould. He watched the photograph taken through our own window. When I stopped the video, he said, "That's our backyard." I said, "Yes." He looked at the table for a long time. He said, "What do I do?" I said, "Hear all of it first, and then tell me whether you are standing beside me on this. I am not waiting more than 48 hours. He said, "I am beside you." So I told him everything. When I finished, he said, "Todd." I said, "Call him." He called Todd from the back porch. He came inside 22 minutes later and sat down and said, Todd knew. Not everything. But Renata had mentioned 6 months ago that she was worried about Noah and looking into her options. Todd had told her she was overstepping. She hadn't brought it up again. He hadn't told Marcus because he thought it had passed. Marcus asked him to put that in writing. Todd did that same night, a text I screenshotted and saved, dated and time-stamped. Marcus sat on the edge of our bed without his shoes on and said, "I have been making excuses for her for years." I said, "She has been in your life for years. She had a long head start on me. The only thing that matters now is what we choose from here." He said, "What comes next?" I told him. He said okay to all of it. The call from the Oregon Department of Human Services came Thursday at 2:18 in the afternoon. The caseworker's name was Mr. Callahan. He said his office had received a report of concern regarding Noah James Navarro, filed Tuesday evening, and he would like to schedule a home visit Friday morning at 10. I said, "Of course, Mr. Callahan. My husband will be home. Noah will be home. Thank you for the advance notice." He paused. He said, "Most people ask me what the report said." I said, "I am a licensed clinical social worker, Mr. Callahan. I have sat on the other side of this call professionally. I already have a reasonable sense of what it contains. I would like to make sure I have everything ready for you on Friday." He paused longer. He said, "I will see you at 10. I walked into the living room where Marcus was helping Noah build something out of wooden blocks. I said, "Renata filed a report with DHS on Tuesday." Marcus went still. A block fell off the top of the structure, and Noah picked it up and placed it back carefully. I said, "Friday at 10, a caseworker is coming to our home to interview our son because your sister decided to make that happen from her apartment where she has been building a case file in a storage unit for at least 6 months." Marcus said, "What do I do?" I said, "You make Noah's favorite pasta for dinner. You are the home we actually are, and you let me do what I was trained to do." Mr. Callahan arrived Friday at 9:58, mid-40s, navy cardigan, reading glasses on a cord. I offered coffee. Marcus made small talk. Noah was on the living room rug with Patch and a wooden train set. Mr. Callahan looked at our kitchen, the snack drawer, the fruit bowl, the chore chart Noah had decorated with star stickers. He looked at Noah's room, the bookshelves, the framed family photo from our camping trip in the Cascades last July. He spent 12 minutes with Noah alone. I sat at the kitchen table with both hands around my coffee and did not look at the door. Mr. Callahan came out and sat across from me. He said, "Your son told me you make his sandwiches with the bread toasted on one side and that Patch has been to 11 different states." I said 12 if you count the layover in Phoenix. Mr. Callahan almost smiled. He said the report contains specific allegations, photographs, and claims of parental absence. "Can you speak to that?" I said, "I can do better than that." I slid a folder across the table. Inside was the video documentation of the storage unit contents, my agency director's letter on official letterhead, Noah's pediatric records with a statement from his doctor confirming his development and my presence at every appointment, Dana's written account of the parking lot visits with dates, Todd's time-stamped text, the group chat screenshots with captions highlighted, and the photograph of me taken through my own backyard window at 11:47 p.m. Mr. Callahan read for 12 minutes without looking up. He closed the folder. He said, "Mrs. Navarro, this report will be marked unsubstantiated, and I will be flagging the source for a separate internal process." He stood. He said, "Your son is clearly loved and clearly home. I am sorry someone made you prove that." He left at 11:23. I stood at the kitchen window and watched his car pull out, and I let myself have 30 seconds of something close to relief before I went back to the table and kept writing. 2 days later, a card arrived in the mail, cream envelope, heavy stock, Noah's name in Renata's careful handwriting. Inside was an invitation to a birthday gathering at her apartment Saturday the 15th, 2 o'clock, family and close friends, a very special announcement for our birthday boy. Marcus looked at it across the table. He said, "She doesn't think it's over." I said, "She never does." I checked the family group chat. Renata had posted 3 days earlier. "So excited for our family celebration. Can't wait for everyone to see what we've been building for Noah." 24 RSVPs in the thread. Marcus's 3 cousins, 2 of Renata's neighbors, Patricia Gould, RSVP, looking forward to it, I showed Marcus the RSVP. He looked at the name. He said her attorney is coming to the party. I said she doesn't think it's a party. She thinks it's an announcement. I texted Yara one sentence. She is still holding the event Saturday. Yara texted back in 40 seconds. Good. We go. Noah slid into the kitchen in his socks and held up the invitation. He said, "Is this for me?" I said, "Yes, bud." He said, "Are we going?" I said, "Yes." And we're bringing Patch. Friday night, kitchen table, Yara, Marcus, me, 3 teas, a plate of crackers nobody touched. Marcus said we could just not go. Let the documents speak. I said, and let her tell 24 people I kept her from her nephew. She built this room. We are going to stand in it. Yara said, we will go clean. 3 documents, clear sentences, no volume, then we leave. Marcus said, Renata told me this week that Patch was at her apartment and she was washing him. Patch has been on Noah's bed every night for 2 weeks. She lied about a blanket to create a reason for contact. Yara said, it is the easiest lie to disprove, and she chose it anyway because she believes the plan is still working. I said, good, we use that. Yara said, I'll be at the back of the room with the portfolio. I won't move until you stand. Marcus said, I stand next to you. I said, yes, and you do not apologize for anything that is not yours to apologize for. Saturday morning, I sat on the edge of Noah's bed while he chose what to wear. I had bought him a green shirt with a rocket on it 2 weeks before any of this began. Renata had sent him a button-down with a card that said, dress nice for the announcement. Noah held up the rocket shirt. He said, this one. I said, perfect choice. He dressed himself. He tied his shoes on the second try. He picked up Patch and stood in the doorway with his serious face and said, Mama, do I have to keep Renata's secret? I knelt in front of him. I put my hands on his shoulders. I said, no. You do not have to keep any secret from me. Not now. Not when you're older. Not ever. If anyone asks you to keep something from Mama or Dad, you tell us the same day. You are not in trouble for telling the truth. You will never be in trouble for that. He put his arms around my neck. Patch pressed against my cheek. He said, can I bring him? I said, Patch goes everywhere we go. I picked up my bag. Inside it was a manila folder with 5 tabbed sections and my name written on the front in my own handwriting. We arrived at Renata's building at 1:50. 18 cars in the lot. Renata opened the door before we knocked. White dress. Hair freshly set, both arms out. She went straight past Marcus, straight past me, and knelt in front of Noah. Oh, sweetheart, you're here. I missed you so much. She reached for Patch. Oh, you have your blanket. I was so worried it was still here. Noah held Patch against his chest and said very clearly, Mama had it. Renata's smile adjusted. She stood. She said, Claire, I'm so glad you came. I said, of course. It's Noah's birthday celebration. Yara went to the far corner and put her portfolio on her knee. Patricia Gould stood by the kitchen counter in a gray blazer with a glass of sparkling water watching the door. Renata tapped her glass and the room went quiet. She looked around at the gathered faces with the expression of someone who has been planning a speech for a long time. She said, thank you all for being here for this little guy and for what I know is going to be a beautiful new chapter for our family. She said Claire and Marcus had been giving everything to their work, their careers, their community, remarkable people doing important things, and after a great deal of conversation and love and reflection as a family, they had decided together that Noah would spend the majority of his week with her this coming year so his parents could keep doing what they do, and this little boy could have the stability and presence and slowness of childhood that every child deserves. She pressed her hand to her heart. She looked at me. She said, Claire, you are trusting me with the most important thing in your life, and I do not take that lightly. Patricia Gould raised her glass to take care of my family. Several people started to lift their glasses. Renata looked at Noah and said quietly, with the confidence of someone who believed it was already done, he belongs here. He always has. The room waited. I stood up. I want you to understand that I have sat in rooms with families in complete collapse, people screaming, accusations flying, and I have never raised my voice in any of them. This was no different. The training is the training. Yara slid my folder across the side table. 20 heads turned. I opened it in the first tab. I said, Renata, before we have cake, I'd like the family to see 3 things I think they deserve to know. I removed the first page. I said, Document 1 is a third-party custody petition prepared for the Oregon Family Court dated 8 months ago. The petitioner is Renata Voss. The subject minor is my son, Noah James Navarro. The filing attorney of record is Patricia Gould, whose bar number I have verified as active with the Oregon State Bar. A glass was set down on a table. I did not look up. I removed the second page. I said, Document 2 is a 40-page handwritten journal maintained by Renata documenting alleged incidents of parental neglect over 14 months, none of which are factually accurate. The Oregon Department of Human Services received an anonymous report last Tuesday and closed it as unsubstantiated Friday morning. The department has opened a separate review on the reporting party. I removed the third page. I said Document 3 is a photograph taken through the back window of our home at 11:47 p.m. on a Wednesday evening 7 months ago. It was taken from inside our fenced backyard without our knowledge. I lifted the page so the room could see it, and I read aloud the sentence Renata had written in the journal beneath that date. Observation continued. She does not know how much she is struggling. Our boy needs consistency. 20 people did not move. Renata's composure dropped the way a held breath drops all at once. She said, You went through my storage unit. I said, You gave me the key, Renata? I used it to document what you built. Her voice rose. She said, Marcus, you know how much I love him. You know I would never. Marcus stepped forward and stood beside me. He said, The spare key Renata had to our home and our back gate has been retrieved. The locks are being changed Monday. Effective today, Renata has no access to our home, our property, or our son. Renata turned to Patricia Gould. Patricia, tell them, say something. Patricia Gould set her glass down on the counter. She looked at the floor briefly. Then she looked at me and said, Claire, I should not have taken this on. A member of the bar does not assist in building a case against a fit parent for a family member with no legal standing. I am withdrawing from this matter, and I will be speaking with the bar's ethics board Monday voluntarily. She picked up her bag and walked to the door and let herself out. Renata sat down on the arm of her sofa. Her hands were shaking. She said, I just wanted him to have more. I wanted to give him what his mother doesn't have time to give him. I looked at her for a moment. Then I said, You told my son he lived with you. You told a 6-year-old to keep a secret from his mother. You took photographs through my window in the dark. That is not love, Renata. That is something that happened to you that you tried to make happen to us. I turned to Noah. He was standing by the kitchen doorway holding Patch by the corner. His eyes were as wide as I have ever seen them. I crossed the room. I knelt in front of him. I said, Hi, bud. You want to go home? He nodded. I said, You want to make the pasta with the shells. He nodded again, and the smallest smile came across his face. Marcus picked up Noah's gift bag. Yara walked with us. We went through Renata's front door. We did not run. We walked at the pace of a 6-year-old who was thinking about shell pasta. I buckled Noah into his car seat and gave him Patch and shut the door. I turned around. Renata was in the hallway outside her apartment door, her white dress very still. She called out, Marcus, please. Marcus did not turn around. He got in the passenger seat. I walked to the driver's side, put my hand on the door, and half turned. I spoke just quietly enough for the people nearest the hall to hear. I said, He is coming home with me. He comes home with me every night. I got in. I closed the door. I drove. Noah fell asleep 8 minutes later, Patch tucked under his chin. Marcus watched him in the rearview mirror for a long time. He said, I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I said, She had years of practice before I arrived. The only thing that matters now is what we choose from here. He said, What does that look like? I said, Restraining order Monday, new locks Tuesday, Noah starts with a child therapist Wednesday, couples counseling Thursday, and we never again have a conversation about my parenting where she means well is something you say to me. He nodded. He looked out the window. He said, I should have believed you the first time you said something that felt wrong. I said, Yes. He said, I believe you now. I said, I know. We pulled into our driveway. Marcus got out and came around and opened my door. He said, Stay, I'll get him. He unclipped Noah's seatbelt and lifted him against his shoulder and carried him up the porch steps and through the front door. I sat in the driveway for 1 more minute, both hands on the wheel, engine still running. I thought about a 6-year-old who ran across a lawn and pressed his mouth to my shoulder and told me the truth before anyone had the chance to take it from him. I thought about what it costs to stay quiet when every part of you wants to move loudly. I thought about my mother in the back row of a folding chair with a broken armrest, choosing to show up anyway. Then I turned the engine off and walked up the porch steps and through the front door and heard Marcus upstairs settling Noah into bed and heard Patch land on the floor and get picked back up, and I closed the front door behind me and I locked it. 3 months later, the restraining order was active. No contact with Noah, no appearance within 500 feet of our home or his school, reviewed at 12 months. Patricia Gould filed a voluntary disclosure with the Oregon State Bar Ethics Board 2 weeks after the party, and her name appeared in their published disciplinary notices under voluntary disclosure and remediation. Renata moved to her mother's home in Bend 4 weeks after the party. She sent 2 letters to our address, and I returned both unopened. Todd called Marcus and said he was sorry he hadn't spoken sooner. Marcus told him time would tell. They have had 2 phone calls since. Marcus is in individual therapy every Thursday. We are in couples counseling every other Tuesday. He does not put his grief about his sister down at my feet. He carries it in his own corner, and he processes it with his own support. And when he brings it to me, it is because he is ready and not because he needs me to fix it. That is the agreement we made. Noah has been in play therapy for 10 weeks. He started 1st grade last month. He drew a picture for his classroom family project. 2 adults, 1 child, 1 green blanket. He labeled the blanket. He labeled me. He labeled Marcus. He did not leave anyone out. He did not add anyone who wasn't there. I put it in the fridge, and I look at it every morning when I make his lunch. I have always been a quiet person. I have spent my career in rooms where the loudest voice usually belongs to the most frightened person. I used to wonder whether my quietness made me easier to overlook, easier to move around, easier to plan against. I do not wonder that anymore. The people who make plans about you in private are counting on your composure feeling like absence. They are counting on you being too stunned or too afraid or too loyal to document what you have seen. They are counting on the moment you find out to be the moment you fall apart, so they can point to the falling apart as proof of everything they said about you. What they do not count on is the quiet person who writes it down, who dates it, who reads it back and adds the timestamp and keeps going. When you finally speak, it does not need to be loud. It just needs to be true. And you need to have the receipts. There is a fork in every one of these stories. Most people hesitate at it. They tell themselves it will resolve on its own. They tell themselves the person means well. They tell themselves that saying something will make things worse. And then one day a child presses a mouth against their shoulder and says 6 words that make their hands go cold, and the hesitation is over. And they understand that the fork was never about whether to act. It was always about how prepared they were when the moment finally came. You can start preparing today. Write it down, date it, read it back. You are not imagining it. You never were.